Elizabeth Taylor found a hidden room behind her bedroom wall. When she opened that door, she discovered someone had been living there for months. What she found inside destroyed her. The scratching sound started on November 3, 1971. Elizabeth Taylor lay in her king-sized bed in her Beverly Hills mansion, listening to what sounded like fingernails scraping against wood somewhere inside the walls of her bedroom. At first, she thought it was mice, or maybe the old house settling after another day of California heat followed by the cool desert night. The mansion was built in 1924, after all. Old houses made strange noises, especially houses that had sheltered decades of Hollywood secrets. But this wasn't settling. This wasn't the random scurrying of rodents in the walls. This was deliberate, rhythmic, purposeful. Like someone was trying to send a message, or worse, like someone was trying to get out. Elizabeth had been living in this house for 3 years, ever since her devastating divorce from Richard Burton had left her emotionally shattered and financially vulnerable. She had bought this mansion as a sanctuary, a place where she could heal from the wounds of a very public breakup that had dominated headlines around the world. She knew every creak, every groan, every sound the house made during the long, sleepless nights when pain medication couldn't quiet her racing mind and racing heart. She had walked these halls during her worst periods of insomnia, when memories of Richard haunted her dreams and regrets about their failed marriage kept her awake until dawn. She thought she knew every inch of her sanctuary, every corner of the place that was supposed to keep her safe from the cruel world outside. She was terribly, dangerously wrong. The scratching came again, cutting through the silence of the November night like a knife through silk. 3 long scrapes, then silence. 3 long scrapes, then silence. Always the same pattern, always at exactly the same time, 3:17 a.m. Always from the same place, somewhere behind the wall where her antique vanity stood, the beautiful piece she had bought in Paris during happier times with Richard. Elizabeth sat up in bed, her silk nightgown clinging to her skin, which was suddenly damp with perspiration despite the cool night air. Her heart was racing for reasons she couldn't explain, some primal instinct warning her that something was very wrong in her supposedly safe haven. The sound was coming from inside the wall, but that was impossible. Completely impossible. There was nothing behind that wall except what, exactly? Elizabeth realized with growing unease that she had never really thought about what was on the other side of her bedroom wall. She had simply assumed it was solid structure, part of the house's foundation, nothing more than wood and plaster and the decades-old secrets that all old Hollywood homes kept hidden in their walls. She grabbed her silk robe, the one Richard had given her for their first anniversary, and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor to the vanity. Every step felt like she was walking toward her own doom, but she couldn't stop herself. She pressed her ear against the wall, holding her breath, straining to hear whatever was making those horrible scratching sounds. The scratching stopped immediately, as if whoever or whatever was making the noise knew she was listening, knew she was standing just inches away. The silence was somehow even more terrifying than the sound had been. That's when Elizabeth Taylor made a discovery that would haunt her for the rest of her life and change everything she thought she knew about safety, privacy, and the true cost of fame. As she examined the wall more closely, running her hands along the antique French wallpaper that had been installed when she bought the house, her fingers found something that shouldn't have been there, something that made her blood turn to ice. A seam. A barely perceptible line in the wallpaper that formed the outline of a door that had been so carefully concealed that she had passed by it thousands of times without ever noticing its existence. A hidden door that Elizabeth had been sleeping next to for 3 years without knowing it was there, without knowing that someone could access her bedroom without her knowledge, without realizing that her most private sanctuary was connected to a space she knew nothing about. Her hands trembling with a combination of fear and morbid curiosity, Elizabeth pressed against the seam where the hidden door met the wall. The panel swung inward with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence of her bedroom, revealing a narrow doorway that led into complete darkness. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying a smell that made her stomach turn violently. The distinct scent of someone who had been living in a confined space for far too long, mixed with something else she couldn't identify but that triggered every survival instinct she possessed. Elizabeth grabbed the flashlight she kept in her nightstand drawer for power outages and stepped cautiously through the hidden doorway, shining the beam into the darkness ahead. What she saw in that first sweep of light made her knees buckle and her heart stop beating for what felt like an eternity. The secret room was much larger than she had expected, about the size of a small bedroom, with sloped ceilings that followed the roofline of the house and rough wooden floors that creaked under her weight. But it wasn't empty. It wasn't just a forgotten storage space or an architectural oddity left over from the house's construction. Someone had been living there. Recently. Very recently. There was a mattress on the floor with rumpled sheets that were still warm to the touch, still carrying the impression of a human body. Stacks of magazines and newspapers covered one entire wall, reaching from floor to ceiling, all of them featuring Elizabeth Taylor on the cover, all of them arranged in chronological order like a shrine to her public life. Hundreds of photographs were pinned to another wall with military precision, all of them candid shots of Elizabeth that had clearly been taken without her knowledge, without her consent. Elizabeth getting dressed through her bedroom window, captured with a telephoto lens from some hidden vantage point. Elizabeth crying in her garden after reading a particularly cruel review of her latest film. Elizabeth walking around her house in her nightgown, believing she was safe and private in her own home. Elizabeth collapsing in her living room during the worst days of her divorce proceedings, when the pain of losing Richard had been too much to bear. But the most terrifying discovery was still waiting for her in the corner of the room. On a small wooden table sat dozens of notebooks, each one filled with handwriting in a careful, obsessive script that spoke of hours spent documenting every detail of her life. Elizabeth picked up the top notebook with hands that shook so violently she could barely turn the pages, and opened it to a random entry that made her feel physically sick. November 1st, E took sleeping pills at 11:47 p.m. Prescription bottle indicates Seconal, 100 mg capsules prescribed by Dr. Harrison. She took 2 pills instead of the recommended one, a pattern that has been increasing over the past month. She talks in her sleep when the medication takes effect. Tonight she said, Richard, 17 times and, sorry, 43 times. She also said, please don't leave me, 6 times and, I can't do this anymore, twice. She woke up crying at 2:15 a.m. and went to the kitchen for milk. She didn't turn on the lights. She knows the house well enough to navigate in the dark. She trusts this place completely. She feels safe here. She has no idea how wrong she is. November 2nd, E had visitor today. Agent Harold Morrison stayed for 2 hours. They discussed new film contract, appears to be for thriller set in London. She seemed unhappy with the financial terms but signed the contract anyway. Based on body language and vocal patterns, she needs the money more than she needs creative satisfaction. After Agent left, she went to bedroom and screamed into her pillow for exactly 6 minutes and 43 seconds. I could hear everything clearly through the wall. The soundproofing between the hidden room and her bedroom is minimal. She has no privacy whatsoever, though she believes she does. Elizabeth's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the notebook. Someone had been watching her, documenting her every movement, her every emotion, her every private moment for months. Someone had been living inside her house, in a space she never knew existed, studying her like a laboratory specimen, recording her most vulnerable moments with clinical precision. But who was this person? And why were they doing this? And most terrifyingly, how long had this surveillance been going on without her knowledge? Elizabeth forced herself to keep reading, even though every word made her feel more violated, more exposed, more terrified of what she might discover next. The handwriting never changed, always the same careful script, always the same methodical approach to documenting her life. October 15th, E.T. received phone call at 3:22 a.m. Conversation lasted 18 minutes and 37 seconds. She cried for 11 minutes afterward. Based on fragments I could hear through the wall, call was from R.B., Richard Burton. Pattern analysis suggests he calls when he's intoxicated and experiencing regret about their divorce. She always answers these calls. She always cries afterward. She never learns from the pattern. Her emotional attachment to R.B. remains her greatest vulnerability and could be exploited if necessary. October 20th, E.T. is taking more prescription medication than recommended dosage. She believes she's being careful about hiding her dependency, but I've been counting the pills in her bathroom cabinet during her absence from the house. R. Harrison gave her 30 Seconal capsules on October 10th. She should have 15 left based on prescribed usage. She actually has 7 remaining. She's either taking them more frequently than prescribed or taking higher doses than recommended. Possibly both. Her tolerance is clearly increasing. This represents both a vulnerability and an opportunity. October 25th, E had recurring nightmare again. Same dream as October 18th, October 11th, and September 28th. She screams the name, Michael, repeatedly and then wakes up crying and calling for her mother. Research into her family history suggests Michael was her younger brother who died in a drowning accident when she was 12 years old. Trauma response is consistent with unresolved childhood grief and survivor's guilt. This psychological wound has never healed and represents her deepest emotional trigger. She would be extremely easy to manipulate using carefully crafted references to childhood trauma and family loss. Elizabeth's blood ran cold at that last observation. Easy to manipulate. This wasn't just surveillance. Someone was studying her psychological vulnerabilities, mapping her emotional weaknesses like a predator studying its prey, like a hunter learning the habits of the animal they intended to capture. She flipped through more pages, her heart pounding with the terrible certainty that she was about to discover something even worse, something that would explain why someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to study her without her knowledge. November 1st, Edie is becoming increasingly suspicious of sounds from hiding place. Need to be more careful about movement during her sleeping hours. She's more observant than initial intelligence reports suggested. Her awareness levels may have been underestimated. Recommend moving to Phase 2 ahead of schedule before she discovers the observation post. November 2nd, received new instructions from Control today via dead drop in Griffith Park. Phase 1, Observation and Psychological Profiling, is now complete. Phase 2, Direct Contact and Manipulation, begins next week. E.T. is sufficiently psychologically compromised to be receptive to carefully planned, chance, encounters. Her loneliness, medication dependency, and unresolved trauma regarding family loss make her an ideal target for recruitment into the program. Handler assignment has been confirmed. Elizabeth dropped the notebook as if it had burst into flames. The program? Handler assignment? What did any of this mean? Who was sending instructions? What was Phase 2? And what kind of organization had the resources and motivation to conduct this level of surveillance on a movie star? She grabbed another notebook from the table, this one filled with what looked like architectural drawings and floor plans. But these weren't generic house plans, these were detailed blueprints of her house. Every room, every hallway, every entrance and exit meticulously mapped and labeled. But there were additional details that made her feel physically sick. Notes about her daily routines, her sleeping patterns, when the household staff arrived and departed, when she was most likely to be alone and vulnerable to approach. Whoever had been living in this hidden room knew more about Elizabeth Taylor's life, habits, and psychological state than she knew about herself. They had turned her into a research subject, a case study, a target for something she didn't understand but knew was dangerous. But the worst discovery was waiting in the final notebook she picked up. This one was different from the others, newer, with fewer entries, but written in a tone that was more personal, more emotional than the clinical observations in the other journals. The handwriting was the same, but the content revealed a disturbing evolution in the writer's relationship with their subject. She's even more beautiful in person than she appears in her films. When she sleeps, she looks like a fallen angel. Sometimes I want to reach through the wall and touch her face, to comfort her when she has those terrible nightmares about her dead brother, to tell her that someone finally understands her pain in ways that Richard Burton never did. I've been watching her for 8 months now, and I think I'm falling in love with her. Not the movie star Elizabeth Taylor that the world worships, but the real woman. The lonely, frightened, vulnerable woman who cries herself to sleep and talks to herself when she thinks no one is listening. The woman who takes too many pills to escape memories that haunt her every day. Soon I'll reveal myself to her. I'll tell her that I've been here all along, protecting her, understanding her in ways no one else ever has or ever could. She'll be scared at first, that's natural. But then she'll realize that I'm the only person who truly knows her, the only one who loves the real Elizabeth Taylor instead of just the image she presents to the world. When Phase 2 begins next week, I'll become her salvation. I'll be the answer to her loneliness, the solution to her pain, the family she lost when her brother died. She needs someone who understands her completely, and I'm the only person alive who does. I've studied every aspect of her life, every detail of her personality, every scar on her soul. I know exactly what she needs to be happy. Tomorrow night, I start making contact. Tomorrow night, Elizabeth Taylor's real life begins, and her old life ends forever. Elizabeth backed away from the hidden room as if she had stumbled into hell itself, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had discovered. Someone had been living in her house for 8 months, studying her, documenting her every move, planning some kind of elaborate psychological manipulation. Someone who had convinced themselves they were in love with her, who believed they were destined to be together, who thought they could engineer a relationship based on months of secret surveillance. Someone who was planning to reveal themselves tomorrow night, less than 24 hours from now. Elizabeth ran to her phone to call the police, but then stopped with her hand hovering over the receiver. What would she tell them? That she had found a hidden room in her house that she never knew existed? That someone had been living there for months without her knowledge, without her staff noticing, without any sign of forced entry? How could she explain that she had been completely unaware of an intruder living just feet from her bedroom for 8 months? The police would think she was having another breakdown, another publicity-seeking episode from a fading star desperate for attention. The press would have a field day with the story. Her career, already damaged by years of scandals and personal struggles, might not survive another public humiliation that made her look unstable or delusional. But if she didn't call the police, she would be alone in the house with someone who had been watching her sleep, studying her vulnerabilities, planning to make contact with her in ways she couldn't even imagine. Someone who believed they knew her better than she knew herself, who thought they could manipulate her into some kind of twisted relationship based on months of violation and surveillance. As Elizabeth stood in her bedroom, staring at the hidden door that had been concealed just feet from where she slept every night for 3 years, she realized that everything she thought she knew about her life had been a lie. Her sanctuary had been compromised from the moment she moved in. Her safe haven had been anything but safe. Every private moment, every vulnerable instant, every time she thought she was alone with her grief and her pain, she hadn't been. Someone had been there, in the darkness behind the wall, watching her, learning her, documenting her weaknesses, planning for the day when they would step out of the shadows and into her life whether she wanted them there or not. Elizabeth Taylor had survived scandals that would have destroyed lesser stars, divorces that had been dissected in newspapers around the world, near-death experiences that had tested her strength and resilience, and the brutal scrutiny of Hollywood that had tried to break her spirit since she was a child. But she had never faced anything like this. A threat that came from inside her own home, from someone who claimed to love her but had been violating her privacy in the most intimate ways possible for months. The hidden room had revealed more than just a secret space in her house. It had revealed that Elizabeth Taylor's life was not her own, that her most private moments had been stolen and catalogued, that someone who knew her deepest secrets and greatest fears was preparing to step out of the shadows and into her life. Whether she was ready for them or not, whether she wanted them there or not, whether she could stop them or not, tomorrow night, everything would change. Tomorrow night, Elizabeth Taylor would meet the person who had been living in her walls, breathing her air, watching her sleep, documenting her pain. And she had less than 24 hours to decide what to do about it.